No matter where you are on your filmmaking journey, the one thing that makes you unique as an artist and creator is your style. That can be a visual style, a storytelling style, or even a thematic style, but most great artists, whether they're filmmakers, painters, poets, or whatever, have a unique style that they own. So how do you develop your style, and how do you lean into it to set you apart from all the other filmmakers out there? Well, according to Pablo Picasso anyways, the answer is stealing. His exact quote is, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." And I think it's some of the most solid advice out there for creatives of any kind who are working on establishing their own style. Now, it might sound a little counterintuitive to try and become unique by stealing from others, but in this video, I'm gonna get into exactly why I think stealing is one of the best ways to find your own filmmaking style, how to steal effectively, and at the end, I'll talk about the best technique I know of to make sure you've stolen like a pro. So get out your lockpicks and sneaking shoes, because today we're gonna do some serious stealing. Hey guys, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Luke Forsyth, and on this channel, I teach the skills I've learned over 10 years working as a documentary filmmaker and photographer. If you're into that kind of thing, make sure to steal that subscribe button for more videos like it every week. Okay, so we all know Pablo Picasso as one of the most influential and famous painters of all time. So it might be a bit surprising to hear him encouraging people to steal from other artists.
Good artists copy, great artists steal.
But the key here is that he's differentiating between copying and stealing, and if we just soften the word steal to borrow or inspire instead, I think what he's really saying is that we as artists need to stand on the shoulders of the people and the techniques that have come before us. Now, just copying what someone has already done can be derivative, just like redoing the same story someone else has done because it worked for them. By contrast, stealing or borrowing their techniques and making them your own leads to the evolution of your art form. Great art is influenced by the other great art that came before it, and that's how we're able to keep creating and innovating, even though most of the basic themes out there have already been explored. Just like Picasso was influenced heavily by Cézanne, see that one art history class in college finally paid off. The best filmmakers and photographers out there are influenced by the greats that come before them. For a more current example, I just watched the new All Quiet on the Western Front, which I think is one of the most haunting and powerful anti-war movies ever made. And it's impossible not to see the influences of all the other war movies that came before it, like Saving Private Ryan. Now, before Saving Private Ryan, I feel like war movies were more typically focused on heroism and saving the day against all odds, rather than the ultra-realistic violence and the there are no winners in war approach that Spielberg took. So many war movies that came after have built on this tradition until we get to All Quiet on the Western Front now, which is even bleaker, more violent, and less hero-focused than anything I've seen before. If Picasso had watched both movies, I think he'd see the stealing at work pretty quickly. See, for me, and I think Picasso, stealing is a good thing. It shows that we are students of what's already been made and that we're taking the time to understand what those people did and why. Then we take the parts from the past that have resonated with us and blend them into our own creative vision, which is how art develops and progresses from cave paintings to computer animation. If no one stole ideas and expanded on them, art would stagnate, and that's how things get boring. It's not just Picasso either. Some of you might have read Austin Kleon's book Steal Like an Artist, which touches on a lot of similar ideas, but expanded in a way that's relevant to the modern world. Ironically, I'm sure Austin would be the first one to point out how much of his idea for what went on to be a best-selling book was stolen from Picasso, who almost definitely stole the idea from someone else. I'll link to Austin's book in the description, but I loved it when I was first getting into photography, and I think it still holds up today. But to steal well, you need to do it with intention, and that means understanding what you're stealing and why. If you just blindly emulate stuff, then you're only copying. Let me give you an example from the early days of my photojournalism career. I absolutely loved and still do love the photographer James Nachtwey and the documentary War Photographer that was about him. And it was probably that movie that was the biggest influence in me dropping out of grad school to go after my photography dreams. I watched that movie probably half a dozen times and I couldn't believe how good his pictures were. There was one picture in particular of a boy standing in a bombed out street in Chechnya that I was really drawn to. And for the next 2 years while I was building my first portfolio, I tried constantly to copy the framing. There's actually still a picture I have on my website now that's so obviously influenced by Nachtwey's picture, and every time I've ever shown it at a festival or portfolio, people have called me out on it right away. It's not like it's a bad photo or anything, but it's a clear copy. And like Picasso said, good artists copy, but great ones steal. So what's the difference between stealing and copying? Well, for me, it comes down to whether or not you fully understand why you like something and how exactly you're incorporating it into your own work. It's like doing Bob Ross paintings. You know that guy with the huge hair who taught painting on TV? Now Bob Ross is a total legend who inspired tons of people to get into art. I'm not taking anything away from him at all. But when you followed Bob Ross exactly, you might come out with a really cool painting that looked aesthetically nice, but for some reason when you sat down and tried and make your own paintings on a blank canvas, nothing would come out. It's like without the guy to follow every step of the way, you couldn't produce at the same level. And for me, this is the main difference. To properly steal another technique from an artist or filmmaker or whoever, you have to understand why you even like something in the first place. That's the only way you can incorporate what they're doing in your own work. And by the time you go through that whole process of internalizing it and studying it and finally putting out your own version of it, it can't help but be different than what you were stealing from in the first place. Instead of just a carbon copy like you have with paint by numbers, if you steal properly, you end up with something that might be heavily influenced by something else, but is actually uniquely yours. So what are some of the different ways we can try and steal like pros? Well, to start, you need to figure out what you like and why. This might sound really obvious, but the reality is that most people don't really know. When I was just learning photography, one of the first assignments my mentor gave me was to go through the entire roster of one of my favorite photo agencies and then pick out 5 projects that I liked more than the rest. That was easy enough, but then he asked me to explain in detail why I liked them, and I realized I didn't really know. I mean, I had some vague ideas like I liked the emotion or the light is nice, but when I really tried to tell him exactly what was happening in each photo that drew me to it, I didn't have the vocabulary. And that's sort of a problem if you're trying to steal from someone because you can't steal what you don't really understand. I'm gonna go over my absolute favorite exercise to figure out whether or not you fully understand something or not in just a minute. But in the meantime, here's a quick assignment. Pick 1 or 2 of your favorite films, documentaries, photographers, or whoever you think you might be interested in stealing from. Then try and make a bullet point list on a piece of paper or your phone that lists in detail, as much detail as possible, what specifically you like about it. The first time I tried to do this, I think I got stuck at around 5 things, and most of them were pretty surface level. See if you can go even deeper and list 10 or more things that you really like, and more importantly, why you like them. Nice light is a valid thing to say, but why does the nice light make this scene or movie better? What is the nice light adding to the story? Why is this light nicer than some other lighting options? This is a surprisingly tough thing to do, but taking the time to formally note this stuff down is how you watch things like a real student who wants to become a thief one day. Give it a try. I think you're gonna find that it gives you ideas for your own work pretty quickly. All right, so you've started watching things like a student and you're starting to understand why you're drawn to certain movies or directors. Now it's time for the final exercise I mentioned a second ago, and this is such a great way to know whether or not you fully understand something before you move on to the real job, which is stealing it for yourself. And that's the Feynman technique. Richard Feynman was a mathematician and a writer who worked on the Manhattan Project, which is the group of scientists that designed the first atomic bomb during World War II. I know most people didn't get into filmmaking to talk about math, but hear me out for a second, because when it comes to learning, I don't think that anyone does it better than Feynman. A lot of the time it seems like the smartest people out there talk in a way that's really hard to follow for the average person. But Feynman wasn't one of those guys, despite being smarter than 99.9% of the population. He believed that unless you could explain something in a way that a non-expert could understand, then you didn't really understand it yourself. In fact, I think his exact wording was, choose a concept you're in and then explain it to a 12-year-old. Maybe this was because a teacher, and it seems like he was a really good teacher, but his solution was to first physically write out simple explanations for whatever you were trying to learn, then take that written document and use it to teach the idea to a 12-year-old. If he couldn't find a way to break down the ideas well enough, he didn't know well enough. Sounds pretty simple, but it can be a total game changer if you apply it to your filmmaking or photography, or any art form for that matter. When I was first learning photography, I found the basics of the exposure triangle really confusing. I mean how the ISO, shutter, and aperture all work together when you shoot on manual mode. So I tried the Feynman technique. On a sheet of paper, I first wrote out in simple language everything I knew about what an aperture was and how it worked. Then I did the same for the aperture and the ISO, and then again for how they all played together to properly expose a picture. It did take quite a while and a lot of studying, but by the time I was able to write it all out and it made sense, I realized that I now actually understood how to set up my camera for the first time. I was living in Korea at the time and I didn't have a 12-year-old of my own to try it on, but even the first step was a game changer for my own understanding. I did the same thing again when I started shooting video, but the challenge this time was to describe how video settings and photo settings were different. You can also do this for creative things, like why a certain shot is so good or why you like a film or movie more than others. Try it sometime. Watch a documentary you love, Find a scene or shot you really like, make notes on it, and then try to write a simple paragraph or two that describes what exactly makes it such a good piece of filmmaking in a way that a kid could understand. Once you're able to break something down that well, I promise that you're going to be able to implement the same techniques in your own work so much more naturally. That may be the first and last time I reference advanced math on this channel, but the Feynman technique really does work, and it's going to make you such a better thief. If you can train yourself to study the work of others and take the time to deeply understand why it's good through something like the Feynman technique, I guarantee that you're going to see your own work getting better fast. That's how you stop copying and start stealing. Okay, so that's it for this video, and hopefully it gave you some ideas on how to start stealing like Picasso. It's definitely helped me on my journey as a photographer and filmmaker, and I'm sure it will do the same for you. If you like that video, maybe think about subscribing to the channel so I can keep making the stuff you want to see. Or maybe check out this other video I made about how to level up your cinematography. See ya.
Eh bien, c'est fini.